Muito boa tarde. Muito boa tarde. Vamos dar início à abertura do ano académico 2017-2018. Senhora Vice-Reitora, Professora Isabel Rocha, que sei que visita o ICS pela primeira vez, bem-vinda ao ICS e muito obrigado pela sua presença em representação do Sr. Reitor da Universidade de Lisboa. Caros colegas e amigos de outras escolas da Universidade de Lisboa e escolas das universidades portuguesas, caros investigadores, estudantes, técnicos do Instituto de Ciências Sociais, todos os convidados, dear Professor Joel Mokir, bem-vindos à abertura do ano académico 2017-2018 e à palestra Sedas Nunes, que anualmente assinala o arranque das nossas atividades letivas. A special welcome to Professor Joel Mokir, who will give the inaugural lecture of our academic year. Professor Mokir is a well-known and most distinguished economic historian at Northwestern University, Chicago, and will be introduced by Pedro Leins in a short while. Thank you so much, Joel, for being with us today. We all look forward to listening to your talk on this main topic, which I suppose is a topic of your forthcoming book, or one of your forthcoming books, on the history of technology and innovation. My apologies for keeping these brief introductory remarks in Portuguese, but as the English say, noblesse oblige, so I will speak in Portuguese. A palestra Sedas Nunes recorda-nos o nome do fundador do Gabinete de Investigações Sociais e do Instituto de Ciências Sociais. E por isso saudamos também, muito especialmente e de uma forma muito calorosa, os amigos que de longa data acompanharam esse momento de criação. Vejo o Dr. Raul Silva Pereira entre nós, é sempre um gosto tê-lo connosco, mas também a Maria Luz Lima dos Santos, José Manuel Rolo e tantos outros colegas que continuam ativos na sua presença e na sua memória viva do ICS e do Gabinete de Investigações Sociais, desde esse momento de arranque no início da década de 60. Vale a pena recordar um texto que é um texto de revisitação obrigatória para melhor se conhecer a gênese do Instituto de Ciências Sociais e para melhor se refletir sobre o caminho percorrido e a percorrer, e refiro-me ao célebre artigo sobre a história e as histórias do GIS e do ICS, que foi publicado no número 100 da Análise Social, um artigo de Adério Sedas Nunes, em que, como muito bem notou Renato Lessa, num texto recente dedicado a Sedas Nunes se faz intérprete de si e intérprete de Portugal. Nesse texto duplamente autobiográfico de si e da instituição que ajudou a criar e a consolidar, Sedas Nunes recorda o papel, e vou citar, de uma geração de pessoas que souberam desenvolver investigações que testemunham e decorrem de um gosto de conhecer e dar a conhecer melhor a sociedade a que todos pertencemos. Mas também testemunham e decorrem de um interesse vívido por fundamentais problemas sociais, económicos, políticos e culturais que se levantam ou se podem levantar em cada uma dessas múltiplas áreas sociais. Fim de citação. Os primeiros números da análise social, e muito especialmente os textos assinados por Sedas Nunes, tiveram o imenso mérito de contribuir para uma reflexão aprofundada sobre a realidade social portuguesa, sobre os obstáculos à sua mudança e modernização, sobre as vias abertas para o seu desenvolvimento e progresso. A missão desses textos não era a de prever o futuro, mas proporcionaram um roteiro seguro para uma mais clara identificação de problemas que urgia resolver, para uma mais ampla compreensão da sociedade portuguesa e da sua dinâmica de evolução em contexto internacional. A vontade e o gosto de conhecer e dar a conhecer as realidades sociais continua a marcar a nossa agenda de pesquisa, ainda que desenvolvida em moldes bem diferentes do que aquilo que se fazia há 55 anos. Este é um momento que se figura especialmente oportuno para recordar a vocação e a visão de Sedas Nunes, atendendo à fase em que nos encontramos de preparação de um novo relatório de autoavaliação e de um novo programa estratégico de fundamentação do financiamento da FCT para os próximos 5 anos. Encaramos com relativa tranquilidade este processo de avaliação e de candidatura a financiamento. O ICS tem provas
dadas de relevância e impacto do trabalho de pesquisa desenvolvido pelos seus investigadores, seja em termos individuais, seja considerados nos grupos de investigação que integram. O envolvimento em redes nacionais e internacionais de pesquisa, em que se destaca o envolvimento nas redes da Universidade de Lisboa e nos colégios da Universidade de Lisboa, a atitude de busca contínua de oportunidades de financiamento proporcionadas por programas europeus, entre os quais cumpre destacar as 4 ERC Grants obtidas por investigadores, aliás, melhor dizendo, investigadoras do ICS nos últimos 3 anos, a presença de publicações de investigadores do ICS nas mais prestigiadas revistas e editoras internacionais, não refiro rankings, nem quartis, nem fatores de impacto, nem número de citações, para não ferir as suscetibilidades do léxico que agora se considera ser politicamente correto, mas, sobretudo, os resultados do conhecimento acrescentado, relevante e inovador sobre os temas da nossa agenda alargada de pesquisa, em torno dos tópicos da inclusão, da cidadania, da sustentabilidade, dos quais fazemos uma ampla difusão no nosso site Ciência Aberta, que convido todos a visitarem, e sobre os quais se anuncia a preparação de 3 volumes de reflexões interdisciplinares numa edição organizada pelo Conselho Científico do ICS. Todos estes elementos oferecem-nos, no fundo, bases sólidas e inquestionáveis para uma avaliação que, não duvidamos, irá colocar o ICS no topo da classificação das unidades de ID em Ciências Sociais e Humanidades. Mas eu há pouco disse relativa tranquilidade, porque o clima de incerteza e de imprevisibilidade que envolve as decisões, as indecisões e as não decisões da FCT impõem algumas cautelas realistas. Uma das matérias de maior indefinição é a que se refere ao modo como vai ser operacionalizado o financiamento estratégico relativo à consolidação do emprego científico, ao desenvolvimento de apoios à formação avançada em programas de doutoramento e ao fortalecimento de infraestruturas de investigação, designadamente no que diz respeito à produção, coprodução e arquivo de dados em ciências sociais. A experiência e provas dadas pelo ICS nestes domínios são a garantia do sucesso de uma candidatura a financiamento estratégico que, todavia, ficará, em última instância, dependente das recomendações, naturalmente subjetivas, do painel de avaliadores. Permitam-me que destaque neste contexto as preocupações ditadas pela indefinição de políticas públicas na área de investigação e desenvolvimento, ciência e tecnologia. Permitam-me que destaque neste contexto destas preocupações a questão da precariedade do emprego científico e o adensar de interrogações e inquietações, quase sempre resultantes da falta ou da falha de informação e, em alguns casos, de desinformação, que têm sido suscitadas a propósito da interpretação e do modo de aplicação da famigerada Lei 57 de 2017. Em especial, no que se refere às disposições transitórias que estabelecem a obrigatoriedade de abertura de concursos para celebração de contratos com bolseiros de pós-doutoramento. Dado o peso quantitativo e qualitativo destes bolseiros na estrutura de recursos humanos do ICS, representam cerca de metade dos membros da equipa de investigação registada na FCT e contribuem de uma forma significativa para o CV coletivo do Instituto de Ciências Sociais. Dado este peso quantitativo e qualitativo, não posso deixar de lamentar o atraso e a incerteza que ainda rodeia a aplicação da legislação em vigor. Para que fique claro o sentido da cadeia de responsabilidades em todo este processo, ou seja, de quem é a culpa no momento exato em que nos encontramos, depende neste momento exclusivamente da FCT e do Ministério que a tutela a identificação de quem se pode submeter aos procedimentos concursais e a garantia de financiamento dos encargos resultantes dos contratos que vierem a ser celebrados. Esperemos que, após a aprovação do Orçamento de Estado para 2018, esta situação fique bem clarificada e todos os passos que temos dado aqui no ICS para arrancar com os concursos com a maior brevidade possível se possa, de facto, concretizar. Os bolseiros de pós-doutoramento acolhidos pelo Instituto de Ciências Sociais passaram por um processo prévio de pré-seleção, em que o ICS demonstrou a sua disponibilidade para servir como instituição de acolhimento. Os seus relatórios anuais de atividade são previamente aprovados pelo Conselho de Gestão, antes de submetidos à FCT. E os relatórios para renovação de triênio são sujeitos a 2 pareceres de especialistas externos, a quem confiamos o exercício de uma arbitragem científica independente. À semelhança do que acontece com o Corpo Permanente de Investigadores do ICS, numa percentagem que é rigorosamente igual àquela que diz respeito ao Corpo Permanente, apenas 21% fizeram o seu doutoramento na Universidade de Lisboa, em contraste flagrante com a taxa de endogamia da Universidade de Lisboa, cujo valor médio, calculado pela Direção-Geral de Estatística do Ensino Superior, é de 74%. Num relatório recente da DGES, em que publica os dados sobre a endogamia no sistema universitário português, a Universidade de Lisboa tem, de facto, esta média de 74%. O ICS não está representado nesse estudo porque o ICS não conta para o REBITS, para o registro, do serviço docente, porque nós somos da carreira de investigação, mas fazendo exatamente o estudo com a mesma metodologia, o ICS tem uma taxa de 21%, quando comparada com a taxa de 74% do conjunto da Universidade de Lisboa. Atendendo à sua natureza e à sua dimensão, o ICS não pode, obviamente, incorporar na sua estrutura de recursos permanentes todos os bolseiros de pós-doutoramento que, através do compromisso assumido pela FCT, vão ver a sua situação regularizada nos próximos 6 anos e não quer deixar de continuar a abrir as portas a outros investigadores de pós-doutoramento que escolham o ICS como instituição para poderem enriquecer o seu currículo. Mas queremos, urgentemente, uma clarificação da situação, porque ela é fator de ansiedade individual e institucional que dificilmente nós podemos continuar a gerir da forma como o temos gerido. Gostaria de terminar com uma palavra especial de boas-vindas aos novos estudantes de doutoramento que escolheram um dos programas doutorais em que o ICS participa. A colaboração intra- e interuniversitária é garantia de uma experiência curricular e institucional muito rica e diversificada. A investigação produzida no ICS só pode valorizar-se através do envolvimento crescente dos doutorandos que nos confiam o acompanhamento da sua formação avançada. Os resultados globais do número de inscritos neste ano 2017-2018 são muito positivos, conforme certamente irá ser assinalado pelo Presidente do Conselho Pedagógico e Presidente da Comissão de Estudos Pós-Graduados, Andrés Malamud, que falará em breve. A Rita Reis, que aqui saúdo, representando todos os nossos doutorandos, vai falar de seguida, é doutoranda de um programa conjunto da Universidade de Lisboa que envolve o ICS e o ISCSP, o programa de Antropologia. Este é um bom exemplo do bom trabalho que as escolas da Universidade de Lisboa podem fazer em conjunto, numa perspectiva de racionalização e de valorização da oferta educativa em cursos de terceiro ciclo. Neste, como em outros domínios, a vontade do ICS de contribuir para o desenvolvimento da Universidade de Lisboa é enorme. O Sr. Reitor, e a Reitoria sabe isso, e cara Isabel Rocha, peço que transmita de novo ao Sr. Reitor esta nossa mobilização e esta nossa vontade de construir, de facto, uma universidade de investigação, a nossa Universidade de Lisboa, para a qual o ICS tem um papel absolutamente decisivo na construção da nossa universidade. Esperemos ter a oportunidade para assim o demonstrar ao longo do ano letivo que já se iniciou há um mês e que agora conhece o seu arranque simbólico. A todos agradeço a vossa presença e desejo um excelente ano de trabalho. Muito obrigado.
Boa tarde a todos. Excelentíssima Vice-Reitora da Universidade de Lisboa, professora Isabel Rocha, excelentíssimo Diretor do Instituto de Ciências Sociais, professor José Luís Cardoso, senhores participantes e convidados. Em primeiro lugar, agradeço o convite que me foi endereçado pelo Presidente da Comissão de Estudos Pós-Graduados, Dr. Andrés Malamud, e pelo Coordenador do Programa de Antropologia da Universidade de Lisboa, o Dr. João Vasconcelos, para aqui apresentar uma, entre muitas, perspectiva do que é ser doutoranda no Instituto de Ciências Sociais. A minha experiência neste Instituto e a perspectiva que aqui apresento são, por um lado, marcadas pelo meu background individual, pelo meu tema de pesquisa, o conflito do Saara Ocidental, e pelas sucessivas tentativas de obtenção de financiamento num contexto marcado pela recente e drástica diminuição do investimento público no ensino superior e na ciência. Por outro lado, a minha experiência e a minha perspectiva são marcadas pela dinâmica da turma que agora inicia o segundo ano do doutoramento em Antropologia. Creio que em qualquer percurso doutoral dependente de financiamento é inevitável o confronto com a mercantilização do ensino superior e a rentabilidade da produção científica. A rentabilização da ciência afeta todas as áreas do saber, mas em especial as ciências sociais e humanas. No momento em que a utilidade científica é frequentemente associada a um ganho económico imediato e onde muitas vezes se questiona a utilidade e até mesmo a cientificidade destas áreas. Se é verdade que um doutoramento é um processo solitário e, por vezes, um tanto ou quanto esquizofrénico, também se trata de um processo fluido, configurado e reconfigurado constantemente. Muitas vezes se discutem as formas como uma leitura revolucionou o quadro analítico. O terreno se revelou radicalmente diferente do idealizado ou da relação com a orientação. Menor atenção recebem o processo de construção de uma investigação e as reconfigurações constantes que ocorrem no seio das instituições de acolhimento, especialmente no diálogo e troca entre colegas, cada um com o seu projeto e pesquisa. Quando em 2016 iniciei o meu doutoramento no ICS, tive o privilégio de integrar uma turma onde, apesar das distâncias temáticas e geográficas dos terrenos, os debates e a interajuda foram constantes. Não raramente, os temas das sessões extrapolaram as salas de aulas, desde as leituras dos projetos aos ensaios finais, das discussões sobre sessões passadas, da troca de opiniões sobre um tema geral à discussão de questões particulares, das idas aos terrenos dos outros, mas especialmente a possibilidade de questionar e responder, sem pudores nem constrangimentos, às perguntas o quê, como e porquê. Integrar o Dante permitiu-me desenvolver o meu projeto de investigação num ambiente que, apesar de exigente, é marcado pela proximidade entre doutorandos, investigadores e docentes, onde a disponibilidade para abordar este ou aquele ponto de pesquisa não termina no orientador. Pelo contrário, prolonga-se pelas mesas do bar e em diversos tipos de sessões de trabalho mais ou menos formais. Além do usufruto deste ambiente académico, desenvolver um programa de trabalhos neste instituto é ter acesso a excelentes condições físicas, bases bibliográficas e meios de divulgação de resultados e publicações invejáveis. Desejo a todos uma experiência tão gratificante como a que tenho tido e bom trabalho neste ano letivo que se inicia. Obrigada.
Muito obrigado, Rita. Bem-vindos a todos. Esta abertura do ano académico é dedicada sobretudo aos estudantes. E há aqui dois tipos de estudantes. Os velhos, que vêm de anos anteriores, e os novos. Eu vou dedicar esta breve introdução, sobretudo, a explicar-vos onde que vocês se meteram. Porque o ICS é uma instituição peculiar. É diferente no âmbito das ciências sociais portuguesas. Como vocês sabem, eu sou 100% português. Se não acreditarem, é o governo que certifica. Mas sou também outras coisas. Sou florentino, sou argentino, sou outras coisas que prefiro não mencionar. Mas prefiro pensar no ICS de uma maneira parecida, como uma instituição 100% portuguesa, e muitas coisas mais. É também uma instituição muito europeia. Nós, quando aspiramos à excelência, não queremos ser apenas os melhores ou estar entre os melhores em Portugal. Queremos estar entre os melhores em Europa, e não apenas. Também temos áreas ou nichos de excelência que concorrem com vantagem no âmbito internacional. E nós temos que fazer isto, porque a nossa natureza obriga-nos. E o que é a nossa natureza? O que tem o ICS de diferente do resto? Primeiro, dedicação intensiva e quase exclusiva à investigação. E com esta dedicação intensiva e quase exclusiva vêm dois privilégios. O privilégio para os investigadores, que damos poucas aulas, e o privilégio para os estudantes, que vêm aprender com os produtores do conhecimento. Vêm encontrar-se com o conhecimento sem intermediários, por aqueles que achamos que descobrimos alguma coisa que vale a pena contar. Então, esta natureza diferente do resto e estes privilégios partilhados entre investigadores e alunos têm um custo, tem que merecer-se. E nós, para demonstrar que merecemos privilégios, temos três maneiras de fazer. A primeira é produzir conhecimento. É medir esse conhecimento, compará-lo com outros, concorrer com outros e mostrar que o nosso é, pelo menos, tão bom como o deles. E mostramos de duas maneiras, com publicações internacionais, em top journals, em livros, em projetos de pesquisa e com financiamento, ganhando projetos nacionais, mas sobretudo internacionais. E nesse aspecto, com estas 4 bolsas da ERC, o ICS é uma instituição que não sei se está no topo, mas não sei se há mais alguma em Portugal que tem esta quantidade e, sobretudo, esta densidade, em função de um corpo pequeno académico. A segunda maneira de demonstrar é com o outreach, a divulgação. E vocês vão se fartar de encontrar investigadores do ICS nos mídias, nos jornais, na televisão, na rádio. É isso que também temos que fazer. É isso parte do que justifica o nosso privilégio. E, finalmente, aquilo onde entram vocês, a formação pós-graduada, que tem que ser uma formação de excelência, não pode ser uma formação média. Não podemos ser medíocres, não temos direito. Temos demasiados privilégios. E isto exige duas coisas. Exige exigência, por dois lados. Por um lado, nós vamos exigir-vos. Nós queremos que os nossos estudantes sejam do melhor que há no ambiente. Mas, reciprocamente, vocês têm que nos exigir. Vocês têm que lograr e conseguir que os investigadores aqui sejam também bons docentes. E dediquem tempo à supervisão, tempo às tutorias, que orientem realmente, que sejam melhores do que aqueles que estão lá fora, que têm que trabalhar muito mais do que nós. Em carga horária, não produção científica e esperamos não excelência da formação dos estudantes. Há no ICS 9 doutoramentos, 9 programas de doutoramento e 2 de mestrado. Todos eles estão em redes nacionais e internacionais. Vocês vão se encontrar com colegas que passam por aqui, por vezes estão mais tempo, um semestre sim, um semestre não, e isso é parte da riqueza também. E vão se encontrar com um gabinete de pós-graduação que é muito eficiente, está muito bem preparado, mas precisa também da vossa exigência e do vosso feedback. A Maria Goretti, a Sônia e a Cláudia estão aqui permanentemente para nos ajudar em tudo aquilo que precisarmos. Há apenas uma coisa que o ICS tem que melhorar, porque está muito para trás relativamente a outras instituições. Equilíbrio de género. Não pode ser que só mulheres continuem a ganhar os prémios. É preciso que vocês colaborem para gerar uma situação mais balanceada. Obrigado.
Sr. Professor José Luís Cardoso, diretor do Instituto de Ciências Sociais da Universidade de Lisboa e demais membros dos órgãos de gestão do ICS, caros investigadores e docentes, alunos de doutoramento e colaboradores desta casa, em nome do vice-reitor do reitor da Universidade de Lisboa, professor António Serra, quero cumprimentá-los, desejando-vos as maiores felicidades para este novo ano letivo que se inicia hoje de uma forma mais formal. Quero também cumprimentá-los em meu nome pessoal, é a primeira vez, como disse o professor José Luís Cardoso, que eu estou no ICS. Sabia que existia o ICS aqui para estas zonas da cidade universitária, mas eu morando ali quase do outro lado da rua, ali na Faculdade de Medicina, raras vezes venho para este lado. Fiquei a conhecer esta parte da cidade universitária, que não é muito longe da parte onde eu fiz a minha formação, porque a minha área base, ou a minha formação base é em farmácia. Portanto, ando aqui nas redondezas, mas efetivamente nunca tinha vindo mais para baixo, digamos assim. É um gosto estar aqui hoje e quero, como já disse, desejar-vos as maiores felicidades para este novo ano letivo que se vai iniciar, estando certa que o vosso trabalho e o vosso esforço serão fundamentais para a consolidação dos padrões de excelência da Universidade de Lisboa, que já ouvimos aqui na intervenção anterior, estão muito bem determinados no ICS, mas que sirvam também para a consolidação da sua multidisciplinaridade, que é importante, e da sua internacionalização. I would like also to take the opportunity to welcome Professor Joel Moquir to the University of Lisbon and to compliment you on behalf of the Rector, Professor Serra. It's an honor to have you here and to be able to profit from your words and thoughts. Thank you for coming. Welcome. E a todos vós desejo um bom ano letivo de 2017-2018. Muito obrigada.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. It's a great pleasure to me to introduce Professor Joel Moquir as a 2017 Professor Sedas Nunes Lecturer. It's really a great pleasure. Thank you for coming, Joel. Joel Moquir is Professor of Economics and Professor of History, both, at the Northwestern University. He's a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, former President of Economic History Association, among many other memberships, and also an honorary member of the European Society of the History of Economic Thought, of which José Luís Cardoso was president, and I think this coincided. He has written 12 highly influential books. One of them is entitled The Enlightened Economy, and Enlightened Economy has just entered the economic history speak. So when we talk about enlightened economy in the 18th century, we refer to the title of one of his books and over 100 articles. He certainly is one of the most influential economic historians in the world. I mean, I really do mean this. Now, he has revolutionized our knowledge and enhanced our ability to discuss the causes of the British Industrial Revolution. And this is not a small thing, because really it's one of the major topics in economic history. Why the West grew rich and the rest didn't for a long period of time. And mostly the sources of technological change, that's where he's more specialized, to my view, and the origins of modern economic growth. But really, it's really these big themes. In the early part of his career, Professor Mulcahy's career, he also worked on the Great Irish Famine. That's the first book, the second book I read of his, and on the Dutch economic history. He's a leading contributor to the literature on the history of technology and how knowledge and technological change led to modern economic growth. So this is really about, really the top specialist on this big topic, the sources of modern economic growth. I have also to add that he has a big passion for debate. Many people in economic history recall this huge debate that there was with Bob Allen in the Pact Cathedral of Utrecht in the Netherlands. It was really one of the liveliest debates all of us have been present to. And if I may add a personal point here, when I was transforming myself from being an economist to be an economic historian, one of the papers, one of the articles that influenced me the most was Demand versus Supply in the British Industrial Revolution, of course by Professor Joël Mokyr. I was a supply-sider as economist by formation, and this paper, this article, allowed me to continue to be a supply-sider in economic history, and that was really a great relief. So it is a great pleasure to have him with us here today, giving a lecture on the past and the future of innovation, some lessons from economic history. So may I ask you to join me in welcoming Professor Mokyr.
Thank you. So I did. You can use this. That can go. Okay. I did change the title a little bit, but it's still going to be about the same thing. And let me explain the title a little bit for those of you for whom English is not a first language. English is funny that way. The word secular, of course, has two sort of non-overlapping meaning. It means something that is not religious, but it also means something in the very long run, I think, taken from the French word siècle. And I mean it in the latter, not has anything about religion here. But the term secular stagnation isn't mine, and I do want to address it because it is very much about what we can learn from history about our current world. So here we go. So are you worried about secular stagnation? Well, Larry Summers is. This is Larry Summers, in case he's sort of hard to miss. Former Secretary of Treasury, President of Harvard. You go to a conference and you run into Larry Summers, you know he's here. He's there because he has a lot to say about everything. And so he wrote this article about secular stagnation, which was quite influential. Now, if this is not enough for you, this is my Northwestern colleague, Robert J. Gordon, who's written a big fat book called The Rise and Fall of American Growth, which is published in my series, so I disagree with it, but it's clearly a very important and influential book. And both of them argue from slightly different points of view, basically that the good times are over. We've had a great run since the Industrial Revolution. Bob Gordon would probably say since the Civil War, but essentially by 2015 or 2017, the good times are over. Economic growth is going to disappear. Now, of course, is secular stagnation a real threat? You know, as an economic historian, you've got to scratch your head a little bit, and you realize that, in fact, there's nothing new here. Nobody would have complained about secular stagnation before the Industrial Revolution, because stagnation was all basically there was, you know. If there was economic growth or not before the Industrial Revolution is something of a debate. There's some fundamentalists like Gregory Clark who basically claim there was absolutely nothing happening. I think we're probably not quite ready to accept that. But if, insofar that there was any economic growth before the Industrial Revolution, first, it was exceedingly slow. So if the average rate of growth in the world today has been hovering around 2% a year, something like that, before the Industrial Revolution, maybe 0.1% a year. Well, you know, that's a small fraction of what we have today. And what's more, economic growth really was not sustainable. That is to say, there are periods in which we actually see some improvement, and then they are followed by some major reverse, and they tend to be very vulnerable to outside events, sometimes of them nature, many of them man-made, as I'll come back to in a minute. And essentially, you see sort of economic growth looking like this, but in the very long run, this is very close to a stationary process in which there is very little trend. And the reason for that, I think, is primarily, as I think we all sort of know, is that it is a process that if when growth occurs, it isn't so much driven by technology. That's not to say that there was no technological progress. We all know about the great inventions, you know, of before the Industrial Revolution, you know, the printing press and the compass and gunpowder and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, these things were too few and too far in between that they could change the pattern of living standards in the long run. Instead, most economic growth such as there is based on these, what we call these Smithian effects. And these Smithian effects are the result of more commerce, more specialization, maybe better allocation of resources, institutional changes, but technology was a very, very small factor in that. And I think what happens, the way I see the Industrial Revolution, is that it is a phase transition, as the physicists say, in what drives economic growth. Instead of these sort of commercial and allocation effects, economic growth becomes the norm because it is driven by primarily innovation. And so what we see happening in history is what sort of called the hockey stick effect. Right? So the hockey stick effect is sort of, this is the way it is, and all of a sudden it shoots up. So it's shaped like a hockey stick. That's why it's called the hockey stick effect. And so, you know, I mean, sometimes this question is almost banal. But you may well ask yourself, well, why is it really that there was so little economic growth in the world before the Industrial Revolution? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about three different phenomena and then explain how I think they worked in the past, and then take a step back and say, all right, well, how does this apply to our own time? Okay, so let's do this. So the first one is the one that's by far the most popular among economic historians, and it's basically based on demographic negative feedback. The second is a little bit less well known, but certainly those with a good, you know, training in pre-1800 history will recognize it immediately. And finally, this is my own little thing, which I'll talk about in a minute. Okay, so let's go first and talk about these Malthusian feedback. So basically what a Malthusian feedback is, as I think you've probably all seen it somewhere in your career, essentially every time there's a living standard rise, what happens is that people have more babies and fewer people die in infancy, and so population catches up, and eventually you are back where you started. Okay, so this is what classical economists call the iron law of wages. And you know, I thought when I was a graduate student, we all thought this thing was dead and buried. But economic historians have revived it. But basically, then, what I'm going to argue is that the Malthusian feedbacks have disappeared. That in many countries, this sort of institutional feedback is going to disappear, and that most importantly, there is a change in the way we process knowledge that promises to sustain economic growth. So let's go do this. Malthusianism has been, I think, a hardy weed to eradicate. You know, I still remember, you know, in the 1960s, there was a guy at Stanford called Paul Ehrlich who wrote a book called The Population Bomb. I don't know, many of you are old enough to remember that. He became something of a celebrity, and he was predicting doom and gloom in the sense that the population of the world would keep expanding until there was nothing more for anybody to eat and we'd run out of all raw materials. I think that stuff is fairly dead now, and just as well, if you ask me. But in fact, population issues remained at the heart of the secular stagnation debate, because the article that actually coined the term secular stagnation was published in the American Economic Review in 1939 by its then president, Alvin Hansen, who was a famous macroeconomist and one of Keynes's first disciples in the United States. And basically, what Hansen said is the problem we were not going to grow is population is growing too slowly. So this is Malthusianism on its head, so to speak. And of course, if you worry about population growing too slowly in 1939, you ought to worry about it even more so in 2017. Okay, and so if demography, then it's not absurd, and Gordon makes this argument in spades, and so does Larry Summers, that in the West population has stopped growing, roughly speaking. Okay, so in some countries it's worse than in others, but almost all European countries now are at below replacement fertility. The United States is still a little bit above it, but essentially most of the world is moving towards zero population growth, with the notable exception of Africa, and of course we don't know exactly what's going to happen there. But because population growth is driven by a combination of very low fertility rates, paired to, or offset in part, by rising life expectancy, the one thing we know for sure is that the average population of the world is growing rapidly. So the aging process is something that Halvin already is concerned about, and a lot of economists worry about today. It's not trivial. If you look at the old age dependency ratio, okay, which is how many people, sort of retired people over 65 or some definition like that, divided by the rest of the population, it's expected to rise from 13% in 2015 to 38% by the end of the 21st century. And if you look at the median population age, and these things can be predicted with reasonable of certainty, I mean, it looks actually quite scary. I mean, if you look at Germany, it's supposed to median population age is supposed to rise from 38 to 51. In China, from 35 to 46. Korea from 38 to 53, and basically, I don't know what it is for Portugal, but I'm sure it's somewhere close to it. It's happening everywhere. The population is getting to be older. And so what Hansen basically said, and this is 39, mind you, is that slow population growth is bad because it will hold down investment. And I've thought about this, and I don't think we really quite know what's going on. But my sense is that seems to be wrong. And it's wrong largely because if current retirement ages are going to stay roughly where they are, they may not, they may go up, I hope they do, but it looks like there's a lot of resistance to that. The dependency ratios will rise. Well, what that, of course, will mean is that because these people are old but they're still consuming, but they're no longer producing, that means that aggregate demand is going to rise faster than aggregate supply, to put it in the crudest of Keynesian terms. And that should really mitigate these concerns that Larry Summers has about stagnation being driven from the demand side by inadequate demand. And also not so sure that it will actually slow down investment. What it will probably do, it will change the composition of investment, which is always happening, and it should be happening. I think we all experience that investment is shifting to sectors of the economy which are geared toward the fact that we have a lot of old people. So medical care, for sure, to tourism, with tourism in particular, a special kind of tourism that's geared for older people. What I call geriatric infrastructure. I just invented that term. Don't use it too much. Again, I'm not sure it's a winner, but it kind of explains what it is, right? There's nursing homes, but also more home services. We know we have in America something called Meals on Wheels. Okay, so people who have a hard time getting to a restaurant and so on and so forth, they can actually, there's a service that brings food to their homes, and things of that nature. And basically just a whole bunch of technological and infrastructural changes that cater to the needs of the elderly. And I can talk more about it if anybody's interested. It's fascinating stuff. But what I think is almost surely inevitable is that the crushing costs of medical care and pensions, whoever is paying the pensions, will probably not be matched by rising taxes, and that therefore government deficits are likely to increase across the board in all of the West. And if that is the case, the thing I would worry about is not secular stagnation, but the return of inflation. Now, that may not happen in the next 5 years, but most of you, I think, will experience that. If there's anything I worry about as far as aging is concerned, it's not a slowdown because of insufficient aggregate demand, but simply the sort of widely observed phenomenon that the capacity to learn new skills is a negative function of age. It's something that you all experience. It's harder to learn to play the violin when you're 70 than when you're 6, or languages, or you're using computers, and on and on and on. And of course, as the rate of technology change accelerates, people have to retool all the time. And with a larger number of people in the brackets that find it harder and harder to retool, we may have introducing some kind of rigidity in the ability of the labor force to adjust. That is something I am worried about, but it's something for which there ought to be policy solutions, which we can talk about later on. The other issue, and why I don't want to be too cavalier about Malthus, is that Malthus really was talking about the ratio of population to what he called land. But we no longer are too worried about land, but we're worried about resources. And maybe, even if the population is not growing, we're running out of resources. We're destroying our planet because our planet is all we have. I share that. I share that every day. But there's something I do want to point out, and that is the last 200 years, technology has become increasingly resource-using. We have been incredibly wasteful, not just in burning hydrocarbons also, that's a big part of it, but also in using all kind of things that then weren't being recycled, metals and other raw materials and things like that. But that is because there wasn't really any price to these things, and there were no real government policies that were environmental friendly, so nobody really cared. In fact, you could argue that the main cost of using hydrocarbons really hadn't penetrated into people's mind until about 20 years ago, when the evidence for climate change started to mount, and now basically I think this has become a consensus everywhere, except the White House, and sooner or later that it will get there as well, for by hook and by crook. And so what I want to point out is that technological change can be resource using, but it can also be resource saving. And there are a large number of recent inventions that do exactly that. So people can talk about wind power and solar power. No. So the one I like is the invention of LED lighting, which really is something that's sort of come online only seriously in the last 5 years, and now everybody I know is switching to it. Now, here are two numbers we're thinking about. LED lighting absorbs about 15% of global electricity consumption, and therefore contributes, roughly speaking, about 5% of overall global greenhouse emissions. If we switch to worldwide to LED lights, in one day we switch, of course not going to happen because it's expensive, but it will take a decade or so, we would cut that back by 85%. That's a serious way in which technology is being used to save the planet and to save resources rather than use it. And so my sense is overall that climate change and what's known as its evil twin, which people know much less about, which is just as scary, that's ocean acidification, will provide an enormous strain on resources. And what that means is, for better or for worse, we're going to have to invest enormous amounts in infrastructure. Now, whether that's good news or bad news, I don't know. I mean, these things are expensive and they're essentially there just to maintain our current living standards. But what it really means is that whatever you worry about, secular stagnation is not going to be it. You know, we are going to spend a large amount of money in rebuilding and rejiggering our infrastructure. And, you know, we're just getting started. I mean, Puerto Rico needs a new electrical system, in case you hadn't heard. This is not going to be cheap, and they're not going to raise taxes for that. That's going to come out of deficit spending one way or another. Now, you know, whether we should therefore count these things as growth or not is actually a non-trivial question on which economists disagree. Because we're only saving, as I said, what's already there. So I don't know about that, but it's going to happen because there's no choice, really. Now, I want to say something about institutions. As I showed on the earlier slide, and I maybe should explain this now, one of the main reasons that there was so little growth before the Industrial Revolution is not just demographic feedback, it's institutional feedback. And what I mean by institutional feedback is something very specific. If you look at the history of almost any place in the world, it's true for much of Europe, but it's equally true of China. If you have a region which is doing well because they're having more trade and they're having maybe some technological change and maybe they're having better institutions and the financial infrastructure and they urbanize, one of the things that happens is that these places usually have neighbors. And these neighbors are poor but strong. And these neighbors have a very strong incentive to come in and basically, you know, take what these guys say. It's predatory behavior, if you want. And you can tell the history, you know, of the Low Countries or of Northern Italy or of China and lots of other places in those terms, which is these are places that were extremely successful, and then sooner or later some other neighbor comes up, you know, whether they're French or Spanish or English or Swedish. I mean, it happens all the time. And they basically try to steal what these people have. But in the process, of course, there's a huge deadweight loss. They destroy a lot of the wealth. So what these people can steal is much less than what the local people lose, okay? And, you know, this is what happens in Baghdad, if you want, in 1258, when the Mongols come and basically to plunder the city, and in the process they wipe out, you know, 800,000 people. So this is happening through much of European history. By 1815, this is becoming rare. I'm not saying it never happens, but it's becoming rare. This is a Pax Britannica, and you no longer, when war breaks out in Europe, it isn't about you're richer than I am, but I'm stronger than you, so I'm going to come and take what you have. It's about other things. And I think today, that kind of danger, I don't want to say it's disappeared, but it's no longer so threatening. Okay, so you think about the Kuwait 1991 invasion. So this was a classic case of predatory behavior. The Kuwait was small but rich, Iraq was poor but strong. So they said, oh yeah, well, let's walk in there and take what these guys got under some pretext. But it failed. The international community doesn't allow this anymore. And Saddam Hussein learned that the hard way. And you know, look today at small, rich countries, you know, Luxembourg, Singapore. You know, they have strong neighbors, but the likelihood that Luxembourg is going to be invaded by Germany tomorrow because they have a high income per capita somehow seems small. Singapore may be, you know, they're a bit worried about Malaysia, but it's not going to happen probably in the foreseeable future. But I'm less sure about this, and this line is sort of a bit of hedging going on. I mean, we don't know if the Western powers will going to continue to take that stand. And in that case, you know, if you're Estonia, maybe you should worry. Maybe you should. Not maybe, you should worry. And of course, the nature of predatory behavior may change. So we may face a world in which predatory nations, very poor but with nuclear weapons, may engage in nuclear blackmail, where that's actually already happening as we speak. I hope it doesn't end badly. Now, of course, predatory behavior isn't just about foreigners coming in. It's also about local rent seekers, people, a variety of local notables, princes, tax collectors, blah, 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 who basically say, oh, these people are making money, let's go tax them, and let's confiscate their wealth. So this happens fairly routinely in medieval Europe. Some of you may recall the sad story of Jacques Coeur, who was an extremely successful French businessman, entrepreneur. So one day the king needed some money, so he had him jailed for some trumped-up charge and basically confiscated all his wealth. And this was, clearly a case of predatory behavior. Now, we don't do that much of that anymore, but still, to say that internal rent-seeking is disappearing the way international predatory behavior is disappearing, I'm not so sure. And in fact, I would say that we are looking today at a world in which rent-seeking, or the word that's more generally used, corruption, is still extremely prevalent and a major threat to economic growth. And so what I've done here, and this is purely sort of my own sort of thinking, is I've sort of divided the world into sort of three kind of nations, okay? There are nations in which, by any measure, corruption is very minor. Okay, so you look at countries, Scandinavian countries, British offshoots like Australia, New Zealand, the Netherlands, Singapore. I mean, you look at every index you want, World Bank, Transparency International, they're always at the head of the list. Then there's a bunch of countries that are terribly corrupt, but not so corrupt that they don't continue to grow. And so, China, I would say India, Turkey, my state of Illinois, I mean, these are all highly corrupt places, but the corruption is there, but it somehow is kept within certain limits. And so it doesn't seem to have affected the rate of economic growth by much. And then there's the rest of them, in which the corruption is so deep-seated in society that it actually threatens the rule of law, it threatens entrepreneurship, it threatens contract enforcement, it impedes the supply of public goods, and so the economy is sentenced to stagnation simply because the quality of its governance is so poor. So we can all think of millions of examples, Nigeria, Egypt, Russia. I mean, these countries are literally being, I think, condemned to stagnation because of essentially internal predatory behavior. That's known as mafia states or kleptocracies. There's a whole bunch of terms that are being used, but they all basically mean the same things. And so then the question is, if the world is going to become more like these countries, then in fact secular stagnation may enter, not because of the kind of things that Alvin Hansen was worried about, but simply because we are so poorly governed. So what we should hope is that there are enough countries moving from class 3 to class 2 and from class 2 to class 1. Whether that's happening or not, I wish I could be more optimistic. I mean, you could point to some countries in which it's happening. Rwanda and Romania are two cases in point in which they probably moved from class 3 to class 2. But, one of the big issues of our time is to what extent does globalization reduce corruption? There was a big hope that by bringing some corrupt Eastern European countries into the EU, that this would somehow improve their institutions. Certainly what people thought this about Romania and Bulgaria. The record is rather mixed. About Greece, it's probably not very good. So we don't know. But this is something that we will have to keep watching. Now, I want to say one more thing about corruption, and that is, I don't want to make any inferences here from what happened in the past. But we have seen in the past episodes in which corruption has sharply declined, largely because of cultural change. And I would say that one of the great effects of the European Enlightenment has been the decline of corruption. And the best example I can give you is what happened in England. So in England, it was an extremely corrupt country. When Robert Walpole was prime minister, he became prime minister, he had barely a penny to his name, and when he finally quit, his private collection of paintings became the core of what is now known as the Hermitage collection in St. Petersburg. He sold them all off to the Russians. So he must have accumulated a few pennies while he was in office. And everybody knew that the British Parliament and the British government were extraordinarily corrupt. 100 years later, essentially, patronage, as they called it nicely, disappeared. In 1840, England is a country in which, you dig deep enough, you always find something, but nobody in his right mind would call it corrupt. The same would, for instance, be true for many large parts of Germany. So the Prussian civil service, as reformed by the Stein-Hardenberg reforms between 1806 and 1812, was essentially incorruptible. Sometimes one wishes it had been a little bit more corruptible, that's a different story. And so, before, I'd say 1850 or 1860, rent-seeking and internal predation in Europe are on the decline. Then they start coming back in different forms, but never so strong enough, at least not in the West, that they could threaten economic growth. And so, when I would perhaps, one final reflection before I get to the meat of the talk, and that is, in the 20th century, there's a good reason why we economic historians, we talk about technological progress, but institutional change, because institutional progress is kind of hard to tease out of the data or whatever evidence you want to look at. There is no evidence really for that the institutions in the very long run are getting better, and that in fact the average institution today, by some metric that you might want to design, is much better than it was, say, in the late closing years of the Roman Republic. I wouldn't want to stake my reputation on making that argument. What seems to be particularly worrisome is that even in liberal democracies, with strong civil societies and what we call good institutions, they're not inevitably supportive of technological progress or, in fact, of economic growth. There are strong forces that basically say, we've had enough economic growth, we should do other things. We should redistribute, we should consume more leisure, growth is bad. There's a whole sort of sub-literature of people who are anti-growth. So that is perhaps some kind of thing. And the reason why I'm worried about this is that there is always, you look at technological change, which is the main engine of our growth, and basically there's always people who resist it. And there's a brand new book out by Calestous Humain, came out in 2016, about the resistance to technological change. I've been writing about this for quite a while. I'm kind of interested in it because it actually describes something that we ought to worry about a great deal. And so there are sort of three different groups of people who resisted. I'll just go through this quickly. Of course, you always have incumbents. We were just talking this morning about, Jaime and I were talking about Uber, which is, of course, it's not really a technological innovation, but it is based on a whole bunch of new technologies without which it couldn't exist. And yet it runs into terrible resistance. Why? Because there are special interests of people who tend to lose from that. There are different sort of technological resistors, which equally worry me, but they're not obviously that egotistical, and that's people who are worried about unanticipated or unintended or consequences of new techniques. There may be large externalities. Some of these people I find utterly surprising. Some of you may have been following this. So Elon Musk, who's the great American entrepreneur and, of course, the CEO of Tesla car, but he is dead set against artificial intelligence. And he is, there you go, artificial intelligence, he says, is an existential threat to humanity. And you go, Mr. Musk, we have a half-wit in the White House with his finger on the nuclear trigger. You're worried about AI. The existential thing is, we could have a nuclear war tomorrow morning. But that's how these people think, and there's a large group of them, including Stephen Hawking and quite a few others. And finally, of course, and this is the hardest thing to argue, is there are people who just basically, from a purely ethical point of view, have some kind of aversion to people playing God. We shouldn't change too many things that come deeply in our life, And I respect these people. I have long debates with them. They have to understand that we've been playing God for 6,000 years, maybe 60,000 years. We've all been playing God. We're just getting better at it. But that's a different argument. All right, now let me get to the main argument I want to make. That's about technology. So there are two kinds of techno-pessimists. There are techno-pessimists like my own colleague, Robert Gordon, who's basically argued that technological slowdown is going to happen because, I mean, he never puts it that way, but it boils down to it. It's most of that, what could be invented, has been invented already. So we had huge gains in the 20th century thanks to, air conditioning and antibiotics and indoor plumbing and refrigeration, and the usual things. But these have been invented already. We can't invent them again. So basically, we're going to run out of ideas. The other techno-pessimists are exactly arguing the reverse. They are basically foreseeing a world in which technology will become so powerful that we as people have no longer a place in it. So we will be displaced and replaced by machines, and there's different scenarios, all of them dystopian in one form or another, in which we have malevolent robots or, some nanotechnology run amok or, you name it. All kind of sinister ways in which either mankind will be completely eradicated by these evil robots, or that robots will do all the work and will end up in some kind of dystopia in which nobody works. Some of you may remember, this is a book that Kurt Vonnegut published many decades ago called Player Piano, in which he described this world in which all the work is done by robots and people are living these terrible lives, bored and, vapid and so on and so forth. Now, those are two forms of techno-pessimists. And so the good news is, of course, that they can't both be right. The better news is they can both be wrong, and this even better news, they both are wrong. But, so I'm not going to talk about these sort of dystopian predictions of, machines eat man, that kind of thing. I mean, that's... But what I want to briefly just talk about is the Gordon hypothesis, which is how likely is it that looking back at how technological history happened in the past, it is going to sort of run out of ideas. And for that, I need to take a little bit of a step backward. But basically think about the following kind of scenario. What causes technology to advance? I know economic historians have been writing about this for ages. Nathan Rosenberg, Paul David, myself, we've all been worried about this. But one of the things that I think few people would disagree with is that in the certainly last 200 years, what has made technology different from everything that happened before is that we actually start understanding why the things that work actually work. Okay? So it's a big difference between fertilizing a field because that's what your father did and that's what your grandfather did, and you get a better crop, and fertilizing field because you've taken 4 years of organic chemistry in which people explain exactly what the optimal amounts of phosphorus and nitrates are in the soil, because you're going to get it much better if you know what you're doing than if you don't know what you're doing. And the same is true for medicine, for metallurgy, for energy, you name it, it's always true. Now, until about 1750, most of the technology that we had basically was empirical. This works and this doesn't work. I don't know why, that's how it is. That's how God made the world, or, they didn't really have an excuse. And as science advances, it creates what I call an epistemic basis for technology. And I can give you example after example, steel, fertilizer, and you name it. Now it's not, of course, quite right that we first invent the science and then we build the technology. They sort of move cheek and jowl. We invent something, we wonder, gee, how does this work? Oh, maybe it's this, and they come up with a little bit of a theory, they make it a little bit better, and so it goes back and forth. I mean, in the history of the steam engine is a perfect example of that, because the science in which steam engine is based is built, it's basically thermodynamics, and thermodynamics began in 1825 by Sadi Carnot, by watching two working steam engines. So here we had these machines, and really the scientific basis wasn't there. But once Sadi Carnot and others built thermodynamics, you can start engineers like Rudolf Diesel taking this further. So that's basically how these things... But what makes science get better? And this is, I think, the key to understanding modern history. Science gets better because technology gives it better tools. And the connection with better tools is actually, once you think about it, is rather obvious. You know, nature has limited what we can see, what we can hear, the number of calculations that we can make. You know, this is how evolution made us. The trick that technology gives us is to get around to that and see things that evolution didn't mean us to see, or if you believe that God didn't mean us to see. It's fine with me, but it's true. And so science flourishes in Europe. It's not the only thing that drives us, obviously. There's other things, but this is really important. The 17th century scientific revolution got a big stimulus because two tools, the telescope and the microscope, were developed by opticians in the first half of the 17th century, and somebody had the cool idea of taking the telescope and looking at the sky. We all know who that was. Some people had the different cool idea of looking at a microscope at a little piece of water, and so on. So that's how science advances. There's other examples I can give you, but here are one of the best tools in the 20th century that was developed. That's a really huge, is X-ray crystallography. So X-ray crystallography has led to more than 20 Nobel Prizes, depending a bit on how you count. So this is Max von Laue, who developed the mathematics behind it, and this is William Henry Bragg, the guy who first built it. I particularly like him because he bears an uncanny resemblance with John Cleese, if you look carefully. This is the most famous of all X-ray crystallography. This is Rosalind Franklin's 1953 use of crystal spectrography to help discover the structure of DNA, which famously helped two males who didn't do the work to get the Nobel Prize, and she didn't. This is a scandal, but this was the 1950s. That wouldn't happen in our own age, would it? And so then the question is, if you are with me in realizing that it is the tools that in large part drive the science, you know, what is it that we have today? What is the outlook for science? Well, now some of these tools we've had for a long time, okay? So this is a replica of Galileo's telescope, and this is a picture of Robert Hooke's microscope. This is sort of 17th century technology, and as I said, this is clearly important in driving the scientific revolution. But I'll tell you something. Galileo had a telescope. He never had this. This is an artist's impression of the European extremely large telescope, which is deploying using lasers for adaptive optics. To show you what this can do, here are two pictures of the planet Uranus. This one is made with a regular telescope. This one is made with an adaptive telescope that adjusts its picture 10,000 times a second. You can see the difference, okay? So I don't like this. I got something better. Look at this. So this is the James Webb Space Telescope. It's not out yet. It's another year in the launching. But it will turn astronomy on its head. This is far more powerful than the Hubble telescope. This is going to be a tool to end all tools. So compared to this, you know, Galileo's telescope, in no respect, is quite impressive. All right, now, Galileo didn't have that. Neither did Pasteur have this. This, as you probably won't recognize, this is a Betsy-Hell type of stimulated emissions depletion microscope, critical in what we call today nanotechnology. In fact, the microscope, rather than being an ancient tool, it gets better and better. Here is one of the few inventions, as opposed to discoveries, to actually win a Nobel Prize. And I was making this list, and as more as I was writing this, the Nobel Prize for Chemistry was awarded this year as well, in 2017, for what's known as cryomicroscopy, which is essentially a way of freezing live molecules to study the structure of these biological molecules. But here you have a whole list. I'm not going to go through it. It takes too much time. But this is a large number of... So the Nobel people, some of them in physics, some of them in chemistry, but they understand that in order to do good science, it's not enough to discover things. You need to have good tools. 100 meters from my office, this is at Northwestern University at the Center for Quantum Devices, And, the number of uses that lasers are applied for in scientific research is absolutely mind-boggling. So I have a list here, and I'm not going to go through it because it's too involved, and you can all look it up. But this is the last one. The two last ones are worth pointing out. One of them is that it is thanks to lasers that we've been able to verify the Einstein conjecture about gravitational waves. And that's what they got the Nobel Prize for last month. And this was only done 2 years ago. Okay, we knew, or we supposed that these things existed because Einstein proved it mathematically, but it has to be tested. It's hard to test. These guys did it with lasers. The holy grail of all, we're not there yet, is research in nuclear fusion. Lasers are essential there. There's no breakthrough yet, but there will be. Whether it will take 5 years or 50 years, I can't tell, but it will happen. And of course, and this is something which is the most obvious, we have computers. Now, when I talk about the history of technology, my undergraduate at Northwestern sort of sometimes raise their hand and say, well, Professor, can you tell, how did anybody do any research before you had computers, How could you do anything, whatever they do? I'm not sure quite I remember, but, but it's totally amazing. So computers, of course, allow us to do what we all do. It stores data, and it does searches at a fraction of a second. So it makes, in a way, in the limit, it will make, I hate to say it, libraries obsolete, because anything that's in a library you can find on your computers. But that's not all they do. And this is something that actually doesn't get enough attention. What they allow you to do is enormous numbers, mind-boggling numbers of computations that allow you to simulate processes which we can describe mathematically, but which don't have a closed solution. So the only thing you can do is simulate them. But to simulate some of these processes is fiendishly computation intensive. So as the computers are getting better, we are actually not just solving these equations, we are actually designing new fields of research. We now have, and you can all Google it, computational chemistry, we have computational biologies, we can do things in solid state physics, in turbulence, that were unimaginable 20 years ago, because we have that computer power. And if you think current computers can do a lot, wait until you see quantum computing coming online, because that's actually what quantum computing is going to be particularly good at. The other thing worth pointing out is, of course, artificial intelligence. So the whole world is talking about artificial intelligence these days, and it does things that we all know. It organizes researches. It can do literature searches. But above all, what deep learning and artificial intelligence can do is take vast amounts of data and then look for regularities and patterns that are far more than you can ever get by running some kind of statistical package. And that actually will open new scientific horizons, which are, just really boggle the mind. And so, just to sort of sum this up, where Gordon and his fellow doomsters are getting it wrong is that when they assess the economic effects of something like digital technology, and which is true for digital technology, is true for biological technology just as much, is they tend to assess the computer's direct effect on productivity, but not the indirect effect, which works through science, and then that science leads to technological progress, probably in areas very different from where the original technology came from. And it's not just digital, as I said. This is a quote I much love, and anybody who talks to me has to hear it. Freeman Dyson has this wonderful line in the beginning of his book in which he says, the 20th century was the age of physics, the 21st century may be the age of biology. This is surprising, but I think it's probably true. We now have tools that allow us to understand, analyze, and most importantly, manipulate living beings at levels that we never thought were possible. And so, this is something you probably all heard about. I actually thought they were going to give the Nobel Prize for this year. They will, but there's some debate about who the inventor is. But whoever it is, Jennifer Duda or somebody else, these CRISPR-Cas9 techniques will make it possible in the near future for us to design animals and plants increasingly according to the kind of specifications we need. And that's going to be critical, ladies and gentlemen, because our climate is changing on us. And we better worry about the plants and the animals that inhabit it. People are very adaptable, and they can live in a variety of climates. Many plants and animals and fish cannot. We better start thinking about this long and hard. The bad news is, this is inevitable. The good news is, we have the tools to adapt. And so, in manufacturing, of course, and this is something that is sort of almost there, is thanks to non-digital technologies, particularly in things like material science, nanoscopic engineering, we are now coming up with entirely new techniques of making things. The best known one is probably was known as three-dimensional printing, or as it better should be called, additive manufacturing. And so I don't actually like to use the term a third industrial revolution, but this is probably what some economic historian 100 years from now will call it. Because what we are creating is what you could call sort of, paradoxically you could call it mass customization. Okay? So everybody will be able to have the goods that are precisely fitted to her or his needs. And that's true for clothing, it's true for medicine, it's true for furniture, it's true for anything. This is going to be truly revolutionary, and it's basically there. We know how to do it. We still have to drive down the price a bit. But now, I think I'm running out of time, so maybe I'll just be very brief about this. But this is an issue on which people are very worried, and that is what will happen to jobs in this new world that I'm describing to you. Will people have jobs? Will people work, or are we going to go to, as I said, Kurt Vonnegut predicted in this half a century ago? And are we, what will happen to humans? So this is a long debate. I've written about this, but I'm going to make 3 points. The first is, of course, that as every economic historian knows, not everybody in the past worked. There always were leisure classes, okay? And we know a lot about these leisure classes. We probably know more about them than we know about the working class, because they're the people who wrote and about whom people wrote, and gossip columns and so on. They could have been rich aristocrats, or priests, or rabbis, or slave-owning oligarchies. I mean, so these people, there's not much evidence. Also, somebody last night pointed out to me that Machiavelli actually went out and worked as an agricultural laborer, but there are not many cases I heard of that are like that. Most of these guys did not volunteer to pick up a shovel and spend 10 hours in the blazing sun, working in a field. What they did was, we all know what they did. They hunted, and they killed each other, and did some administration and some justice if they were so inclined. They wrote poetry, mostly bad, and basically nobody complained. They had good lives. And so, as Keynes pointed out in 1930, what we are looking at is that everybody will live like that. So somehow, that doesn't sound so bad if you think about it. Maybe Kurt Vonnegut should have read Keynes, who knows. The concern, of course, is that what will these people do? And here's something I want you to think about. One of the astonishing things in the 20th century is the huge technological change in leisure activities. I mean, in 1880, what did people do to have fun? Well, they played cards, and then they played some more cards. And if you were in the United States, you could go out to a sports event where the most popular thing was eye gouging. And not my cup of tea, but this is America. People like violence. They play football now. But basically, the options that we have today to enjoy ourselves when we are not working are mind-boggling. I can at the push of a button on my computer listen to any opera I want. Right there and then, read any novel. And I can, if I were so inclined, play video games. I can fight the Battle of Kursk, or conquer Troy, or murder Julius Caesar, all on my screen. I mean, it's utterly amazing. There's a paper by Eric Hurst and two co-authors at the University of Chicago wondering about why young men aren't working. Why is there declining labor force participation among prime-age males? The answer is, nobody believes this. They're playing video games. That's what they're doing. It's absolutely scary. Now, it's also true that even in a world in which robots and automatons are doing most of the work, people will still work. The question is, will they get paid for it? Well, maybe not. You know, today, a quarter of all Americans are actually engaging in volunteer work. They're working, they're not expected to be paid for it. They're working because it's fun. Same reason, I guess, most people in this room are working. So, I mean, this is just how people are. And we should, I think, realize that our concepts, economic concepts, are changing. What's the limit? We may well reach a world in which only the people who want to work are the people who will be working. For me, this is not a dystopia. For me, this is, I'm not even sure it's a utopia either. It will just be a different world. All right, I'll skip all this. Let me just conclude and then maybe take some questions. Secular stagnation, or the absence of sustainable growth, is basically defining characteristics of most of human history. It's turned into rapid growth only since 1800 or thereabout. There is at least the factors that caused this in the past are not likely to recur. Now, there are legitimate concerns about governance and about open institutions that seem to pose a threat. The threat is not in our ability to invent. The threat is in our ability to govern ourselves. And this is a quote I'm hugely fond of. This is from Sigmund Freud, The Future of an Illusion, and this is sort of real understatement, okay? I mean, while mankind has made continual advances in its control over nature, and may be expected to make still greater ones, it is not possible to establish with certainty that a similar advance has been made in the management of human affairs. I mean, that's just brilliant. Somewhat less eloquent, but equally scary, is this recent working paper by the IMF, who basically said the biggest threat to the world economy is political risk. You know, rising protectionism, neo-nationalism, know-nothingism, populism, obscurantism, and technophobia. I mean, you can add to that list, but you get the gist, and you all know whom I'm talking about. And so, Bob Gordon is worried about headwinds, you know, aging and other things. For me, the most serious headwinds is not the national debt or aging or anything like that. It's this. Against stupidity, the gods themselves contend in vain. Thank you.
So thank you, thank you very much. So we can now take a few questions. Yeah. Joe, no, do you want to sit or?
Whatever, but if you could speak in the microphone, I can hear you.
Hello, I'm Tiago Domingos. I'm from the Engineering School of the University of Lisbon. I'd like first to thank you for a very enjoyable, interesting and stimulating lecture, and especially coming from an engineering school to a social sciences school, seeing such an optimistic outlook on what technology can represent for the future of humanity, regardless of whether I agree with that or not, but it's nice to come here and see that. I'd like to raise an issue, I think, around your central thesis on secular stagnation, and maybe start by your observation that we've had stagnation always, and we haven't had it in the last 300 years, and we came out of it in England with the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century. And first, I'd just like to bring more attention, bring up as the most objective thing that comes to mind about these 300 years, clearly, I would say, and even more, or at least as much as the things you are presenting, is the massive use of fossil fuels. That's I would hazard to say that that's the defining characteristic of our breakout from stagnation, was the massive use of fossil fuels enabled through science and technology. But it was fossil fuels. And building on this, then, I mean, we can see that the fundamental role that energy has had in economic growth. And now we can go to Robert Gordon's description of the process in the US. And precisely what we can see is that the moment of growth in the US happened. He doesn't say that. I'm now interpreting what the numbers he says. happens when you have enormous increase in energy efficiency. He does mention the power of machines that's increasing the horsepower of engines, and that's the moment when that happens, and then it stops in the 1970s. And then we no longer have increasing TFP growth, and we don't have increasing energy efficiency. And the exact same thing holds for Portugal. Pedro Lainch here has made the calculations for Portugal. We have total factor productivity growth in Portugal in 50s and 60s was very large, and very large efficiency growth, energy efficiency growth, and then zero on both counts. And now, the point I'd like to raise in your central thesis is that you're talking about the progress of science and technology, and I fully agree. I fully agree we have a vast arena of possibilities in science and technology for the future, but this progress has been happening continuously for the last 100 years. And so my point is, how do you then relate, it has been always happening, but in some period, the 30s, 40s, and 50s, we had enormous economic growth. In another period, 70s to now, we didn't have enormous economic growth. So it seems there's something missing in terms of the causation.
All right, so these are really good questions. Maybe I can answer this. I'll try to be brief, although I'll probably fail. But let me address the issue of total factor productivity, because it's a big deal, and it plays a very big role in Bob's book and about other people. I'm a productivity skeptic. That is to say, it's not that I think it's not right. I think we're not measuring it right. I think we are, and we're not only that, but not only are we not measuring it right. Nobody argues that we're measuring it right. But I'm arguing the mismeasurement is getting worse. And because it's getting worse, the data seem to indicate that it's not rising, but actually what's happening is that we're measuring less and less. It's not that we're mismeasuring it. We're unmeasuring it. We're missing huge amounts of changes that happen in the economy that don't show up, because they don't show up in GDP. And if ones that don't show up in GDP, they're not going to show up in TFP, because of course GDP is just TFP, divided by some weighted index. And we're missing things. And in fact, Gordon knows this as well as anybody, because look here. This is a story from Bob's history. He was once a member of something called the Boskin Committee. The Boskin Committee was commissioned by, I think, the older President Bush, headed by Michael Boskin, who was this. And basically, their question was, is the consumer price index overstating inflation? And the reason that they're worried about this, of course, because it's very hard for consumer prices to adapt to changing quality of goods. And so the question is, how does qualitative change bias the CPI? And the answer is, very seriously, it's about 1%, which is huge. So today, if you think that measured inflation in the United States is about 1.7, and if you believe that most of that is actually CPI bias, that means that actually GDP is growing much faster than we think, and so is TFP. So why is this? And part of the answer is because we cannot account for the improvement in quality of goods due to technology. The Bureau of Labor Statistics can't do it because the changes are too fast. So there's a few goods in which they try and they have these hedonic calculations. But in fact, they can't. And they're sort of basically admitting that. What makes it worse is that there are new goods coming on the market which they can't deal with. So things that weren't there before, and a large number of these new goods are giving away free. And if they're giving away free, think about things that people enjoy and that play major roles in their lives. Twitter. So if people, since the invention of Twitter, I saw a number, something like 4 billion tweets have been signed. That was before Trump got to be president. It's probably more now. But it never cost anything to send out a tweet. Now, what's the marginal utility of sending out another tweet? I don't know, but we should be worried about the inframarginal utility, and that is huge. We used to, have people looking up things. I mean, it's not just that the internet gives you Wikipedia, which is free and which is much better, certainly now, than the sort of union of all encyclopedias we had before. But in fact, it's far more than Wikipedia. You can look up any fact right now. You look at GPS, you look at all kinds of things that have come online where we can't measure it. The other area in which we have qualitative improvement and new goods coming up is in medicine. There's no way anybody can actually adjust the rising cost of medicine for the fact that arthroscopic surgery today allows you to undergo surgery in 2 hours, which would have put you in bed for 4 weeks 20, 30 years ago. So these qualitative changes don't show up. And, so the answer is, yeah, but we've always had that, because goods go back. But the rate of improvement of existing goods, all the way from, glass, believe it, there's an essay in this week's Economist about the improving quality of glass manufacturing. One of the oldest goods known to people. We are getting so much better at making glass just better, more transparent, adaptable to sunlight, you name it, at all levels. And so GDP statistics are not measuring the rate of improvement correctly, and that's why total factor productivity is off. I think that's very much part of the story. Now, just one word about fossil fuels. Now, this is a debate I'm having with lots of academic historians. How important are fossil fuels? And I know the numbers as well as anybody. We published a bunch of books about this in my series. I know that coal was important and oil was important. But it's worth pointing out something. The coal was always there. When Julius Caesar shows up in England, all the coal that was there, at the time of James Watt was already there. There wasn't anything added, but he couldn't use it. And under Queen Elizabeth I, they were using it more than at the time of Julius Caesar, but it still wasn't driving the economy. It was heating more homes. What made fossil fuels possible is that people figured out ways of finding it, getting it out of the ground, transporting it, using it for new uses. Okay? Now, it's true. This turned out to be a double-edged sword. We now only realize that. But we've already, accumulated enough knowledge, and we are going to basically get rid of. I think the world in 20 years, carbon fuels, will be relegated to a niche, jet planes and maybe a few other things. We will abandon it, not because of some wise policies, but because renewable energies will get to be so cheap that it will just defeat everything. And that's not because we happen to stumble on it. We have the knowledge to design the kind of materials you need in solar panels, you need in wind turbines, and of course we're getting better at using it economically. So in the 19th century, people just burned coal as they saw fit because they didn't need it. And the first steam engines had an efficiency of less than 1%, and even a good water engine an efficiency of 5 to 7%. We today make engines that have an efficiency of 40%. That's still bad because we're still wasting a lot of stuff and heat. But if you look at what we have done, say, with something like LED lighting, I mean, that kind of thing, that's driven by the fact that we have the scientific ability to solve these problems and because somebody thinks that the market wants it. Okay, one more question.
I am Eduardo Viola. I am a professor of international relations at the University of Brasilia, and I am a visiting scholar here for a period. So my question is, I completely agree with your view that is techno-optimistic and your criticism of the techno-pessimist, let's say. I would like to ask you about a more radical view in relation to techno-optimism. That is something like generally the Silicon Valley mindset, particularly kind of synthesizer of this is Ray Kurzweil, singularity is near, how to create demand. He's saying that the synthetic biology, artificial intelligence, and nanotechnology are in an exponential acceleration process that it will is dramatically changing the nature of technological progress in a way that will create a radically, completely different of society. But in this kind of society, the major problem is that just few people will be integrated in this kind of society. The other people could have universal basic income. But the problem is that psychologically, the mind of those people could react very strongly and produce a lot of irrationality in the social dynamic. What do you think about this?
Well, I know this sort of Kurzweilian view. He's not the only one, by the way. There's a whole bunch of people who are really worried about how technology will dehumanize society, if you want. And I must say, I don't have a good feel for that. I think reading Kurzweil, I always get a sense that he knows a great deal about engineering and about computers, but he doesn't actually know very much about people. And so I actually think that, reproducing human creativity with artificial intelligence and deep learning and machines that are cleverer than we are can actually be overstated. I think machines can be made intelligent. I just went to an AI conference in Toronto with a whole bunch of people who pointed out how machines are intelligent. Where I think it would be much more difficult to replicate the capabilities in what people do is in creativity, in intuition, and in instincts, and all kind of sort of tacit things that we know, but we don't know why we know them. And that will be very difficult to reproduce mechanically. And so I'll tell you a little story. There was a guy there talking over at lunch who gave us an example. He says, machines can be creative, and they can be just as creative as people. And the example he gave was this. They took 5 live composers and 5 machines, and they gave all of them an assignment to write a short piece of music in the style of Mozart. So 5 composers wrote a little piano or whatever, and then 5 machines were made to read all of Mozart's printed work, which is a lot, and then they were able to process. And they were told, write something that's like that. And then they gave to an audience of random people and said, tell us which one was written by people and which one was written by a machine. And nobody could tell the difference, right? So the guy told us, and then I raised my hand, and I said, yes, but could you imagine a machine that was Mozart? And he looked, he says, no, that not. And I said, that's where the difference is going to be. Now, the scary thing is, of course, that most of us are not Mozart. And so, the question is, what will happen to the rest of us? And my guess is as good as anybody else. But at this point, that is a problem in the very long run. Right now, what we still have are hundreds of millions of people who are doing extremely difficult physical work in difficult conditions, whose work can be replaced by robots. And when that happens, these people will have to find other positions. That will be the great challenge. This is a challenge in the US. It will be an even bigger challenge in places like, Malaysia and Egypt. And, I worry about that a great deal. Technological change is never the Pareto superior process. There's always somebody who's worse off. It's always been like that. It will always be like this. It is not clean. It is not for nothing that Schubert talking about creative destruction. We are destroying things. And sometimes you may well wonder, is it worth the price? My answer is, if you think technological progress hurts, try technological stagnation. But it will be a high price to pay, and I fully sympathize. Can I have one more question? Yeah.
Hello, I'm Simone Tolumello from this very place. Thank you for your stimulating presentation. Well, I want to start where you just finished, because I could talk about basically. I just felt you really touched many things without touching their political implications. For instance, when you say, climate change is inevitable. I mean, if we let climate change happen. But that said, for instance, these issues of technology and innovation, yes, of course, but I mean, leisure classes, they existed because of slaves, They couldn't have existed back in the day without slaves. So they had to rely on slaves. What if leisure classes start not needing slaves? They may start thinking, well, all those people out there, not useless to us, what are we going to do with them? Someone may start thinking, we can shoot 1 or 2 well, we start doing this in concentration camps in Africa, whatever. But, well, that's, so there are many political implications which I'm feeling they're missing, because I felt the elephant in the room there, which you never, a word you never mentioned, which is capitalism. Sorry for using that word. And and so I'm going to engage on your very grounds on the issue of growth, which I believe is only meaningful within the framework of capitalism. So let's talk about growth from a different perspective, that of word system and word ecology. Some guy like Jason Moore thinks that what happened since fossil fuels in 14th, 15th century was preparing the roots for capitalist accumulation and expansion of frontiers. Then with the Industrial Revolution, growth. And in this process of accumulation was always fed by expanding frontiers. These guys also say, well, maybe we reached the end of the frontiers. Well, we may start exploring Mars or whatever, but within the Earth, maybe we reached the frontiers of possible expansion for accumulation. So what if that will stop growth, that this very system needs frontiers to grow?
Yeah, try.
Marco Allegra, I'm Simone's colleague, and I think that since I'm less old left than Simone, I think that maybe the elephant in the room here is not exactly capitalism, but it's like happiness and freedom, because I think that the main critique that anyone can throw against what your argument is that you leave all the social outside of the picture in a way. So the problem for you is that you have just a topic, so it's economic growth, and like a variable, so it's technological progress. Will this help growth, etc., etc.? And you said that more technology is definitely good, and it's also easy to ridicule, the dystopias, but still, I wouldn't, So I'm really amazed by technological progress. I intend to use it to stay alive, to get rich, etc., etc. But also I think that we're faced with a sort of paradox, because as you said, and I think there is no question about that, we have now a much better world in technological terms. We have better glass, we have Twitter, and so on, etc., etc. But if compare myself to, let's say, another guy like me in 800 BC or something like this, this is my paradox. If the technological progress has produced a totally different world, which is much better, why my life is so miserable? And if my life is not so miserable because I didn't commit suicide yet, why that guy didn't commit suicide in the first place? So I think that you cannot really measure, there's something else that matters for the life of humans, okay? So I totally agree with that. But sometimes I think that, and the technology is reframing the way of life, is inventing new fields of science, etc., etc. You said you should Google computational chemistry. I think that you should Google Google, and that's enough. But what's missing in the picture?
Hang on, this needs an answer, quickly. To you, only one thing. I've been teaching economic history for 42 years. I have never mentioned the word capitalism in a single lecture. I don't know what it is. I don't want to use it. I use growth. But that's fair enough. That's different thing. But the questions are fair. Which is, is all this technology making us in some sense better off? And economists are very agnostic about this. They talk about living standards. They make assumptions about being better. But if I'm so, if everything around me is so good, why am I so miserable? And the answer for most people, I don't know about you, but the answer for most people is they are miserable because they don't know economic history. I mean this completely serious. Because the average woman in 1800 would bury 4 of her children before they reached age 5. And that kind of pain is deeply hardwired in us. And that today, infant mortality is something we don't even know. We are down in most Western country at, 4 per 1,000. as down from 250. I mean, this is amazing. You don't like infant mortality? I'll give you, you should go to, I'm not kidding you here, you should go to a museum of dental practice and see what it meant to be miserable in a dentist chair, in 1650. There is a fantastic painting by a Dutch painter called Jan Steen called The Dentist. And we see a guy sort of strapped, and the misery is coming out of every pore of his body. And all his relatives and neighbors are standing there, and they love him, And then there's his dentist, and he's with his hammer, and I mean, the tools are beyond belief. At one point, some historian, years from now, is going to come back and compare our civilization with the civilization that came before. And if all they find is teeth, we will be the golden age, because this is an age in which people have perfect teeth. They have perfect teeth because fluoridization, prevents cavities, and because orthodontic surgery and orthodontic treatment means we don't all have, I mean, look at your face in paintings of the people have all have these crooked teeth. They have no clue what they're doing. All right? So you don't want teeth, you don't want infant mortality. I'll give you one more example. Okay? And then you have all got the point. Today, if you are my age, I'm 70 years old, okay? 100 years ago, I would, if I'm still alive, I would be deaf, blind, in a wheelchair. Okay? And today, people my age are at the golf course. And they're in the, and they're in the Uffizi Museum, behind a guy who's going there with a flag, and they're watching all these paintings, all these 70 and 80 years old. Why? Because they have hearing aids, they have had cataract surgery, they have metal knees, they have pacemakers. They are alive. Now, are they miserable? Compared to where they would have been 100 years ago, they're not. That's what I can observe. Now, if you did some kind of, test on them, some kind of neuroscience test, and measure the amount of dopamine in their brain, maybe they're miserable because their breakfast had only orange juice and no grapefruit juice or something like that. But compared to what life was before, one of the tasks of economic history is to point out that if you had to choose a year in which you were to be born in human history, it would be 2017. Because from a pure things that we can measure in terms of pain, discomfort, security, and things, all of the things that people didn't have before, we are better off than ever. And that counts for something. Now, do people still kill themselves? Yes, and we should worry why. Do they kill each other? Yes, and we should wonder why. We're not living in a perfect society, but compared to what it was in the past, this is the golden age.
Can you take just one more?
Yeah, of course. I'm just getting going. So speaking, I can hear you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Hi, my name is Amilcar. I work here at ICS. Thank you for a very interesting talk. And I especially like the question and answers parts, to be honest. I'm going to be a bit more boring than my Italian colleagues. I'm not going to speak about capitalism or the joys of life. I'm wondering, well, the whole debate about secular stagnation, as we have it now, is for me a conundrum, in the sense that what you seem to suggest is that we have a measurement problem, i.e., we can't measure productivity adequately in face of modern technology. I presume that that would imply also that we have an issue in how we measure growth, because if, as you say, that we are not able to capture productivity, we're not able to capture growth, because otherwise, if productivity is growing as much, then we would be having skyrocketing levels of growth at the moment, right? At the same time, both inflation and employment are flattening in the past 20, 30 years, right? So is it a problem of measurement, or is actually the model that we use to analyze the relationship between productivity, technological innovation, and how it translates into inflation and employment as much as for growth that is really at stake here?
That's a terrific Here is the tragedy of my professional life. I'm interested in technological change. I've been writing on it for 30 years. I don't know how to measure. I have the instincts of a quantifier. I was born in, I came into economic history when everything was numbers and everything was measurement and everything was, regressions, and I still do that. But I do not know how to measure technological change. I know the various techniques that people use. People use total factor productivity, and people count patterns. And they're actually pointing in different directions in the last 10 years, because total factor productivity is going very little. Patterns actually are growing at an exponential rate. Now, patterns, we all know, is a terribly flawed measure. But in fact, the problem is with inventions in general, is that they don't obey the laws of arithmetic. Right? So one invention plus one invention doesn't mean two inventions. It could mean just one invention, the first one replaces the other, or it could mean four inventions, because between the two of them they create a third thing. And so adding them or subtracting them, it just doesn't make sense. What I do, therefore, and I'm having great fun at it, but it doesn't help me measure, I tell stories. I tell stories about technology. I tell many stories, and and if you tell one anecdote, it's an anecdote. If you tell 10 anecdotes, it's data. But but the truth is, you can't really compare them. What you can do is look at the big picture every once in a while, when you sort of extricate yourself, from the fine details of the, evolution of plastics or other things that I've worked on, and basically say, look, here is what I see. I see, that people have a much better way of coming to grips with their environment. They're establishing regularities and patterns that they never saw before, and they're able to exploit and harness them to their needs. But I really do not know if I could say that our age is more technologically creative than the age of Julius Caesar. Right? That kind of ordinal comparisons are easy to make. But if you ask me, give me 3 episodes in history and rank them, is the age of Julius Caesar more or less technologically productive than the age of Louis XIV? It'd be a hard thing to say. But it's very hard, and this is a bit of a difficulty. But the fact, but all I can say is to quote Einstein, who said that not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. And I think that's probably right about technological change. We're living in the middle of it. It's affecting everybody's life, but actually measuring it, the way physicists or biologists or economists would like to measure it, I don't know how to do, and neither does anybody else. If there's somebody who cracks that in some really clever way, that would change the way they think about it. But I'm not that person.
Okay, thank you very much.